All right, we're live, and I want to welcome James and Lee to this live feedback session. I think this is the first time I've done some of the this thing. Like, is it your first times as well?
Yeah, I haven't done anything like this,
Yeah.
but I'm interested to hear what James has to say. Walk through.
And we will do like a couple of introductions, but I just want to kind of start to say James here is kind of like showing us his production Next.js on Vercel with Sanity site, and like he asked us on Twitter like, hey, like sometimes I wish I could just get like Lee here and Steven. He's not here, unfortunately. I would love to have him as well, and myself to kind of like look at the code and tell me what I can improve and change. And that's what we're going to do for the next hour or so. And yeah, that's like it's very kind of like kudos to you, James, for doing this on live stream in front of everyone with your project. Like if it was me, I would be kind of a little bit nervous, but I'm also nervous because you're also looking at Sanity and Next and Vercel. Like it's like our job to make you successful. Probably also without having to do live streams about your project. so everyone like is in on stage here to kind of like figure this out. But yeah, James, who are you?
James Singleton. I'm a senior software engineer at Zendesk. And the project that we're kind of going over is a project I built from passion. It's called Redshirt Sports, and it's mainly following college football, primarily FCS, so the smaller schools. But yeah, we have a team of about 7 writers, and we've been going strong since 2021. So.
Cool. And Lee, I think you're a known face for everyone who has used Next and maybe is on Twitter. Like maybe a little intro from you as well.
Yeah, sure. I'm Lee. I work at Vercel. Been here for about 4 years, working on Next.js, teaching folks about React and Next and the web, and looking forward to hopefully sharing some knowledge on Next today.
And I'm Knut. I have been at Sanity for 6 years. Used Next since like 2016 or something. Was it even out in 2016? I'm not lying, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, and my job is also developer education and community. And hopefully I can also contribute with some insights to how to integrate Next and Sanity as well. But yeah, let us understand a little bit more about your project, James, and what you're trying to solve and why you ended up using this stack and these tools in the first place.
Sure. So this is the landing page for the website where we have our different writers. As you can see here, we have a couple, and they write about different divisions, conferences, everything like that. And basically, I chose Next.js because that's what I was just familiar with. I had built projects, just side projects in the past with it. And then Sanity kind of came along. I was looking at different CMSs. I had used Contentful in the past, and then kind of just looked at Next.js's examples, and I was like, oh, what is Sanity? And kind of went there down that route. And I think every single project that I now build is Next.js and Sanity, along with Tailwind and Shadc and UI, the whole stack that everybody loves now. But yeah, and it was just super easy to allow our writers to do whatever they want. Like I can build out the studio, which we can get into as well, and they can just write how they want, publish it when they want, and I don't have to worry about it. And yeah.
That's cool. So it seems like a very like content driven website thing, and you have like articles, but you also have like some more like structured content, it seems.
Yeah, so we do have stuff like this where we have every single division that has or conference that has an article written about it. And we have like news pages which bring in every single article that has been written. But yeah.
And what would you say is important? Like, how do you know that this site is successful, kind of?
How do I know that it's successful? People obviously coming to the website and knowing that, hey, they could come here for the best content. It loads like fast. Obviously, I can see metrics on my side for that. And that my editors are like, I want to say like pain-free when it comes to writing, right? Like they can just do as they please and they have a request and I can add it. And I think that's, one of the great things about Sanity is its flexibility in adding additional pieces to say the block content. We have a React tweet that's from Vercel as well. And one of my writers is like, hey, I want to show tweets in my article. It's like, oh, sweet, here you go, plug it in. And
nice.
So I think for me, that's part of the success is my writers can just write and don't have to worry about anything.
So we're not coming in here completely cold. We have done a little bit of prep. And you mentioned that you want to talk about stuff like performance and build times and editorial experience and SEO and stuff. And I guess there's also as reminders of this is a website that has you need to solve redirects and sitemaps and all of that stuff as well. So this is a real production website. So yeah, okay, let's dive into it. Should we start with some of the next stuff maybe? Giving over to you, Lee.
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I can actually kick things off by talking about performance, because you had mentioned you want to find ways to improve site loading performance. You want to talk about that, set the stage, and I can dig in?
Yeah.
Should we share your screen, Lee, or is that now?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. Let's see.
Yeah, James had mentioned ahead of time that he was wondering, hey, I'm getting this 80 when I'm running a Lighthouse test or running another test. How can I help get this up to 90 plus? First, just want to say kudos because 100 accessibility, 100 best practices, 100 SEO. You've clearly taken a lot of time to optimize and make this site really performant. And 81 is not a bad score either, especially when you look at some of these things. There's some small things that we can do to tweak to make this better. But just to quickly set the stage, I know, James, you already know this, but for others listening in, Page Speed Insights is similar to Lighthouse. It's a simulated run testing the performance of your website. So this is on it's a Moto G Power, with slow 4G throttling. This is different from the real user experience of people visiting the site on their different devices. Maybe it's an iPhone or maybe it's a device with fast or slow internet, but it's helpful to have all these signals to understand what's going well and where we can improve. And when you mentioned, ahead of time, James, you said, hey, how do I help get this score up a little bit higher for mobile? Desktop is looking pretty good, but mobile, it's got this 80. The first thing that I noticed was this large LCP, which in a content heavy website like yours, it's usually driven by the images or that LCP element. And when you go down to the options or the diagnostics in here, it is showing that, hey, this LCP element's taking a decent chunk of time to load in. So I think there's an opportunity here. Most of the other stuff wasn't as interesting in terms of raising the floor. So I wanted to spend a little bit more time on the image. So I went over to web page test as well. Another really nice tool for doing a simulated lab test. So Moto G4 on 4G from Virginia. it sounds like you have a statically generated site. So since it's not doing dynamic server rendering, we're not having to go to a server, fetch some data, and come back on demand. So the location doesn't matter as much because it should hopefully be fast in multiple different places around the world because of having a CDN in front with Vercel. So I went into here and it was saying kind of similar results in terms of it was taking a little while for that LCP of that first element. So I pulled up the waterfall and I was just digging into this and I noticed a couple things. So first, there's a couple different font files, which sometimes is fine and expected. But if you really want to tweak the performance as fast as possible, ideally you can get to one font file that is a variable font file that can really help you, squeak out every last bit of performance. Just quickly on that, by the way, you might already be familiar with this. I think you might already be using this, the font module. Are you already using this, James?
I'm actually using Geist. I think that's how you pronounce it. Yeah.
Yep. Nice. Yeah. So you can use the Geist font with this font module. And Geist is a variable font. So that's great. It will help allow you to just load in one font. So that's nice. So you've got some fonts at the top here. You've got some CSS files. We can take a look at your code. I wasn't sure because you mentioned you're using Tailwind. Are there other CSS bits that you're loading in? I don't know if these are CSS modules. Or is it just that main global CSS file?
Just that main global CSS file. I do know React Tweet also brings their own CSS in. So I don't know if maybe there's some prefetching that's potentially happening where React Tweet CSS is coming in. I'm not entirely sure, but yeah, it's just the main CSS file.
We can look at that locally here in a second. So then you've got all the other like JSS chunks for each part of Next.js are loading in. That all seems fine. Plausible, we can talk about here in a second. I noticed something, but then we get to here. This green line is the FCP. So we see here, there's the image, and we have the different images here. Ideally, we started kicking off loading one of these images a bit earlier in the waterfall. And one of the things you can do to help speed that up is the Next.js image component has this prop called priority. And what priority will do is it will preload the image that you're going to have above the viewport. So like that first article image that's going to show up. And, we were talking ahead of time between like Vercel and Sanity, and we're like, okay, there's this Sanity image component, which actually, James, if you want to steal screen share really quick, we could just even look at your code, because I believe if you Command F for Sanity image, inside of your image component, you're using Sanity image. I think there's an opportunity here for us to work together on making a Next.js specific Sanity image that uses Next image under the hood, because you can change what we call loaders to configure where you're fetching your images from, and then you can still fetch them from Sanity's CDN. So you can kind of combine both of the bits there.
Gotcha. Yeah. Because that is one of the reasons why I switched over to it, just because it was content heavy, right? So I was like, just fetching directly from Sanity itself. But yeah, if we can get a Sanity specific loader, that'd be cool. So.
Absolutely. In the short term, like if you want to make a change here without waiting for updates, you could just kick off a preload to the image in your, in the root layout of your application, which we could talk through that. While we're here, do you want to see if there's any other CSS files? So you have the main global CSS file that has your Tailwind code.
Yep.
If you Command P, are there any other CSS files in your repo here? Nope. Okay. And you have this running locally, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe let's try loading the home page and look at the network tab and just see where those CSS chunks are coming from, just out of curiosity. Because it might be, some other components that are being loaded on the page. While you're pulling that up, I'll just mention another thing that I noticed, which was plausible. So I saw you were loading analytics, and you were using the Next-plausible package, which is fine. But there's also an opportunity here for, I think, us to upstream a change into that package to use the font module in Next.js, or not the font module, the script module in Next.js, which helps you load third-party scripts in a performant way. So we'll talk about that one next. Okay, so we've got some CSS for the page, some CSS for the layout. Let's click on one of those. Interesting. If you look at the response tab, okay. What's your Tailwind config look like? Your Tailwind config file?
I just noticed these are duplicates. Interesting. Tailwind config.
Okay, so a common thing that I see in a lot of apps is an overly globbing the content, and it tries to like fetch and compile and grab too many things while looking for Tailwind paths. So that all looks correct to me. Just to double check, like you don't have any JS files. Another common thing I see is people forget the JS prefix in their content path, and like sometimes you miss on Tailwind files, but that might not be an issue.
No, I don't think I have any JS files.
Nice.
Everything's used with TypeScript.
If you scroll down, let's see if there's anything else in here. That all looks good. Typical like ShadCN customization, I think.
Yep.
Okay, keep going, keep going. Yeah, that all seems okay. Maybe I would think that even though using plugins, it would still compile into a single CSS file. Are you importing that globals file anywhere else? That path? I would assume it's just the root layout, but I'd be curious to see if there's...
There we go. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. That would do it.
Yeah. So let's see. You probably only need it in your root layout, and you can remove it from the route group, which is that second option.
This one. Okay, cool.
Yes.
It's so easy to stumble in these things.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
So that's a small win. With Next.plausible, like I mentioned, we could upstream something here to use the script component. If you want to go pop back to my screen sharing really quick, I'll just talk about this. But what this script component does is allows you to put your whatever your script tag is, so the plausible JS from the CDN. But I think what you're wanting here is actually the strategy, which is the default, which is load this, but after the hydration on the page occurs. So after it's interactive, because this felt like it was loading the plausible script a little bit early in the waterfall, and it probably could be a little bit later. So that's a change. I don't know what Plausible recommends in terms of their setup, but it looked like Next.plausible wasn't yet using this script optimization. I think it's relatively new, like Next.js 13, so they might just have not had a chance to do that. But that's one thing. And then, we can kind of ignore the rest of the stuff down here. I think it's less interesting for us to talk through. So images, fonts, scripts, man, those are always the culprits of everything. It's very common. Let's see. Yeah, I think that will help improve the performance a little bit. Those couple things. I see there's a question in the chat. I'll just answer while we're here. Best practice when using Adobe fonts. Common question with the font module is, can I use a font CDN like Adobe fonts versus Google fonts. And the recommendation there is the font module works with local fonts as well. So what you would want to do in that case is just import and use a local font through the source file versus Adobe CDN.
One question about the script tag. It wasn't super obvious to me. Like the example was like getting a script from the CDN, but like when you have a script as a node dependency, how does that work?
That's a good question. I'm not sure if this can take a. Oh, interesting. It can take an internal path. Today I learned. So I guess you could do an inline script, or you could just include a script from a node module. So it should still work even if it's not external.
And I guess there are like some of those node module CDN services as well.
Yes.
That you could maybe use. Yeah. That's cool. Didn't know about this. Seems very useful.
You know, just a slight aside, because James, this is definitely not the first time I've talked to folks about images, fonts, scripts. Like it's very common, so don't feel like it's something that you did wrong. That's why we're trying to add more of these components to help folks with the common building blocks for making their sites faster.
And like apropos Adobe fonts, I feel I remember seeing somewhere that like third-party font CDNs are maybe problematic or something, and that you should kind of maybe self-host.
Yes.
Like, do you know what more about that kind of thing?
100%. So if you're trying to squeak out every last bit of performance for loading your font files, you ideally want to self-host your font files. And that's what the font module will do for you, even if you're using an external CDN like Google Fonts. So you can say, for example, I guess I'm in the API reference right now. Let me go over to the usage. So for example, here, load enter from the Google Font CDN. And when we do the compilation, we're actually going to pull that and self-host it on a Next.js internal route. So you get the benefits of caching that font file on your own domain, not having to go connect to a third-party domain, and just help like squeeze out every last bit of performance.
That's cool.
Fonts are hard. They're super hard.
Fonts, yeah, always has been. Or was it hard back when you like only could use the web safe fonts? I guess it would be easy then, but then you also had the web safe fonts. And that
just use the system font stat for everything.
Remember web safe colors? Yeah. Anyways, I guess we could. What is a good segue from this? I don't know.
Well,
SEO? I don't know.
Yeah, I think
you have more.
James, you had another question. I don't want to steal all of the time. I want to make sure we can talk about Sanity as well. You also had a question around build times, which I think is an interesting thing to spend a second on. If you want to take screen share back and look at your code, I think one thing that you know well, but I'm sure others in the call might be wondering, is like, what happens with the build and how do the builds somehow take longer? Well, when you run next build, you're essentially potentially pre-rendering many different pages. So I'm assuming you have a generate static params somewhere in your application here, probably for the slug. Yeah. So you have this dynamic slug, and you're saying, hey, for the website's, article pages, when I have an article, I want to go get all the different paths from Sanity, and then I want to return all those paths. So when you run your build, I think you had ran it on your machine, you generated like 500 paths or something like that. I don't know if it said exactly how many there were.
Let's see. 422 plus.
Nice. Yeah. So like 425 of those things. So it's an interesting choice, right? Because you now have, as the developer, you get to have this choice of, do I want to spend a little bit more time during a build pre-rendering a static version of every single page ahead of time, or do I want to defer that to happen on the first request to that path? So for example, What you could do here is you could say generate static params, empty array. I actually don't want to pre-render anything ahead of time, but I want to take advantage of ISR with Next.js. And what would happen is the first request to / slug of 2022 FBS transfers to FCS, the first visitor is going to pay that penalty, I guess. They're going to generate the page on demand like a traditional server rendered page, but then it gets generated and cached for future visitors. So you're kind of shifting some of that work from the build into happening on demand. That can be beneficial, especially when you start to have tens of thousands of pages, millions of pages. There's no way you're going to pre-render all of those ahead of time. For your case, though, you might actually be okay with the 5 to 10 minute build because you're saying, I'm fine with when I'm going to production, guaranteeing that the first hit of these sites is going to be a cached pre-rendered page. One heuristic that I've seen people do is you can also like sort your top pages by views or by date published, and maybe you only pre-render like the last month because those are going to be the things more commonly that people are going to go to. If somebody tries to, pull up an article from a year ago, it's fine. Like let them generate it server side on the first time. Another tip that I've seen people do is you can change the static params depending on the environment that you're in. So if you're deploying a change and you open up a PR on Vercel, it's going to automatically use the Git integration to generate a URL where you can like view those changes in this preview environment. When you do that, I mean, you don't necessarily, there's really no point in statically generating all of those pages unless you're specifically trying to like evaluate performance going between static pages. And that's the point of the PR. So there's a cool little trick you can do here, which is basically an if block. It says like if process.env dot, I think it's like Vercel environment. Let me pull up. Well, actually, I can just pull this up over here. System environment variables. I think it is, Vercel _env. So if the Vercel _env is preview, then you can basically say, I'm okay with returning an empty array. And that will help speed up your preview deployments because I don't want to pre-render all of those things. So anywhere you would have a generate static params, you can use that trick.
Nice.
And if this was me for my future self, I would totally put a comment on why those 3 lines are there. That's a pretty neat trick. And we're not into, I guess it's like a kind of a hot topic, like how to render your web page. And what I think is cool is that you have optionality here, and also like conditional optionality. That's pretty cool. Why did you choose to do static pre-rendering in the first place, James? Just curious.
Well, it's actually from a tweet back and forth with Lee on looking at some of the like usage data in Vercel, and at first I was not actually doing the pre-render or the static because, like you mentioned, Lee, like if they're going to something a year ago, sure, they can take that cost, but I didn't really think of sorting maybe by the last month and just doing let's say the last 30 articles or whatever it may be. So that actually might be a good route to go, because then those are the ones people are, like you said, are most likely to go to. But yeah, that's pretty much why.
Yeah, and it's like this, like web development, as you all know, like it's just like kind of like negotiating trade-offs all the time, right? But it is interesting that like static site generation is kind of like feels like this kind of like a fast win, and then your site grows, and then you start to kind of like have the cost of like the time it takes to actually pre-render the whole thing, because it's like just a lot of nature, right? It has to go through a lot of things. So it's interesting when they can have like those more nuanced strategies of like, I want to pre-render this, but not this, and so on. That's pretty neat, I would say. But yeah, I guess like I think there might be a little win when it comes to kind of like also reducing the build time I'm not sure how much. I haven't actually benchmarked it, but like I noticed on your homepage, if you go to your homepage component, I guess it's like the page thing in the website folder group. Let's see. Yeah. So yeah, here a little bit up. So here we have like also kudos React server components. Like it's pretty neat that you can just do that, right? But like here you have like kind of a little waterfall, but also kind of like this sequential fetches, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like, can you tell us like why did you end up with this pattern? What are you trying to do here?
I'm guessing you're talking about like these right here.
Yeah.
Yes. So, if I kind of come back to the homepage here, so I'm just gonna scroll down to the bottom. So originally, like we didn't have different sections, right? We did because we just started out as FCS primarily, right? We didn't have the different D2, D3, FBS, and so I think it was just okay, hey, I did this for FCS, and then I just continued adding on instead of, I guess, kind of re-looking at it and going, how can I do this better, right? But each one of those calls is for like this section, and each one has different articles. So that's kind of how I want to say I fell into that waterfall in a sense. It was oh, hey, we now need another addition on the page. Okay, copy paste this or this division, and you know, Sanity kind of allows you to be like, yeah, just define this param, right? And I could just pass it in.
Yeah.
And since every post has a division, it was just easy for me.
Yeah.
Hindsight 2020, probably not the best, but yeah,
I think
it was easy.
this process that you just described, like you have like, I guess we can call them new business requirements, right? And then oh yeah, I have this pattern already. Just like copy paste the thing. I think like everyone who's done web development ever can recognize having done that. And then you have like some of like anti patterns like sneaking up on you. So yeah, again, I like all of this should be kind of fast, especially if you hit the CDN, but you can put these in a promise.all, for example, to kind of like parallelize them. And I also wonder, like, since it's Grok, which is kind of like Sanity's query language, is like SQL for JSON, I guess. You could also probably do all of this in one query as well. Like I suspect you could even just make everything here one query. Of course, you're getting like a bigger payload back, and that might be kind of like problematic in its own way, depending on how much content this is. But yeah, this is what I would like look to. Yeah.
There's an interesting bit here, because since this is the server component, you're actually not having to expose that larger payload to the browser, which is kind of nice. Typically, like in a Next.js pages router world or in some other frameworks, you would fetch your data on the server, you generate a JSON output, and you kind of embed it in the document that you send back to the browser. This is like the _ next data thing if you've used the pages router before. With server components, React server components, you can just like stream back the HTML that includes the content from the server. One of the interesting things about this, I think, and I can understand, James, how you fell here, is like when you're pre-rendering the page, you're less likely to see this waterfall because it all happens during the build. And then all of a sudden you're like, okay, like my build took a little bit longer. I'm not sure exactly why, but really it was like I had these, 5 or 6 dependent network fetches that were happening, sequentially. Now, if this was happening server rendered on demand, you would feel that a lot more viscerally because you're doing back-to-back 6 network round trips. So there's like a double win combination here. One is you could promise all them, but I like the suggestion. You could probably combine this into a single Grok query. Not only will that make your builds faster, in the case where you generate a page on demand, that's also going to make that page generate faster and show something back to the visitor more quickly.
Cool.
This also made me wonder about like some of the newer capabilities with Next and Vercel, because like how I read this in code, it was like, oh, these are like sections on the homepage that shows like different lists of blog articles, I guess. Like, is this like a venue where we could use like partial pre-rendering stuff for like just stream things in when you kind of get there in the viewport? Is that like a pattern, Lee? I don't know.
Yeah. So the way the app's built right now, I think since it's mostly a content-driven site that doesn't have dynamic bits kind of sprinkled in, I think the way generally that this is structured is great. If you really wanted to like use all of the latest Next.js features, you could explore parallel routes where for each section of the page, you kind of have a route for each one, but it's probably overkill for what you're doing, because there is something nice to just being able to like await some data and drop in a component. And you can also get more fancy with like nested layouts if you want as well. But I think it's fine to do it in this way. In the future, though, like, let's say you get a requirement because you want to add a a dynamically generated comment section on the page, and it needs to read the latest comments on the page load for a given request. The thing that we're working towards in Next.js, it's still kind of experimental, and we're still working through some bits on it, but it's called partial pre-rendering. It's allowing you to kind of mix, okay, I can still send 98% of the page as static, but that comment component, just that one, we want to render that one dynamically. So hopefully by the time you're ready for that, we'll have a stable and ready version.
I also have like another question, which I suspect might come up from everyone who is trying to build with Next and React Server components and like typically content from a CMS and so on. Like, how do you think about fetching content from like a page, not like, or an app route, versus kind of like inside of a component? Like, for example, moving these kind of like content fetches into like the latest division component or something?
Yeah, it's a good question, because especially in a world where, counterintuitively to the name, a server component is like a build component. Like, it's running on the server, but it's not running at runtime. The best way to build this is to co-locate your UI with the data that it requires to generate that UI. So if you have a section component, you might actually put the data fetch for that section down in the component. Now, there's trade-offs to all of this, because I think that is definitely beneficial in some ways. There's also the simplicity of the kind of hoisted data loading pattern that you had in the pages router and in other frameworks, where you fetch the data for the page and then you pass it down. If it's like one level of prop passing, it's probably fine. Like, yeah, just forward D2 articles into the component and I'm done. Like, I might not need to go full server components, maximum granular, I'm trying to do everything the best possible way, because like, it's fine, right? But in really, really large apps, the great thing about that is that you can imagine, especially in the future, somebody publishes React tweet like we did. That's a server component that does data fetching that you can just drop in. And that is an asynchronous component that's somewhere down in the tree. And then Next.js is able to kind of parallelize those data fetches for you.
Yeah, and like, or similar, like if you have like a component that is the same across a lot of routes, right? Like, as your, maybe like your navigation component, or like a latest news thing or whatever, right? And this is kind of like, I guess, somewhat undercommunicated kind of like benefit of the app router when it comes to kind of content-driven websites, I think, to be able to do that and co-locate, as you say, the UI and the fetching. And that kind of gets in, like, there's a question in the chat about revalidation, and I also saw that you have like tag revalidation set up in this repo, James. Like, that is like also like a interesting and kind of like caching. Like I know that you have spent like a lot of time last year talking about caching, Lee. But like maybe we should kind of like develop a little bit here as well to kind of understand what's going on.
Yeah, James, do you have a revalidation route that Sanity calls when you publish changes?
I do.
Nice. Maybe we'll start there. It's probably under API or something. Yeah.
Yep.
So one of the great things about this pattern of content generated websites that James, I think you're doing a great job with here, is that you're able to kind of do some work ahead of time to maybe generate some routes statically or generate some on demand, but you still want to be reactive to upstream content changes coming from Sanity. So what Sanity can do that's really helpful is it can publish webhooks when those content changes happen. And then you can expose this API in your Next.js route through a route handler that is able to essentially listen for that change, understand what exactly has changed here, validate the signature, make sure that it's a legit person calling it, and then use this helpful revalidate tag function. So for those who have used Next.js for a while, tuning in the pages router world, you are kind of revalidating entire paths, and the app router allows you to be a bit more granular in how you kind of tag and revalidate data. If the end result, like in James's case, is that you're still generating an entire page, it doesn't matter as much, but I still think it's a good, helpful practice to like be more specific around the data you're fetching and how you're invalidating it. Because in this instance, right, like if on a page I have a fetch that says it's the body._type, like that's the bit of content that I'm refetching, I'm going to regenerate the whole page, right? I'm revalidating this whole page of content because I'm pre-rendering that whole page. And I take that output and then I cache the entire output. Once you start to get into more a mixing of dynamic applications and more of using some of the more runtime cache features versus like pre-rendering pages at the build, you can push this a little bit further. But for what you're doing with content generated websites, I think this is great.
Yeah, and I think a little bit down the road, we will also have improvements to how this can work and kind of like relieve you a lot of this manual coding stuff, because we have kind of like just launched something called sync tags, like opaque sync tags. They can also like know exactly where content has been updated and so on. So hopefully we can make this a little bit easier as well. That's cool. Yeah, 40 minutes already. I've learned a lot. We can also maybe kind of like dive in a little bit, shift gears a little bit, and dive into some of the editorial experience and SEO and so on, and see how that kind of like relates to the front end. How important is SEO for you, James? It was meant as a rhetorical question, but
yeah, I was gonna say a lot. It's it helps if you could rank in the top 5 on the first page, right? Like especially in a competitive field like college football is, right? So yeah.
Yeah, and like just like I'm not a SEO expert, but I've been around for a little bit. So like typically what seems important for SEO is like the thing we have already talked about, like performance, like is this a great user experience? But also like structured content and metadata. I can never say it, but metadata. This is my Norwegian background coming in, but and you have like a lot of great patterns already. Like you have something called JSON LD. You can maybe show how you can like are integrating that. I'm also like, I wonder if Lee has some insights here as well, how to do great JSON LD. But like you already have structured data from Sanity coming in, and then you are plopping this in to the DOM with this lovely prop called dangerously set under HTML. Like, is this the way, or is there another way to do this? Lee, I don't know.
Yeah, I think to do this specific type of LD JSON format, this kind of is the way.
This is the way.
This is the way. This is the way. There is a metadata API that's built into Next.js that helps you get type-safe access to common link and meta tags that you would put in the head of your document. This is like a separate subset of that, which is specifically for the JSON LD stuff.
Yeah. Feature request, I guess.
Yeah, I feel like JSON LD is kind of strange. Very powerful, but very strange. And there's a popular community package for the pages router. I think it still works for the app router. Next SEO, kind of before we had the metadata API, that was adding some utilities to making this easier. I think a nice addition here could be kind of extending the metadata API for some of the JSON LD stuff. I just don't think we've done it yet.
Yeah, but it seems like a fairly common pattern to me, especially when you get into like people who want to kind of optimize their SEO stuff. I guess like just make sure that JSON LD variable has nice stuff in it and not bad stuff. So yeah, and you also have like a sitemap thing going on, and everyone might not know that you can do this with Next, but you can totally do it.
Yeah, you want to know a fun thing here is that that route handler that we looked at for revalidation, the route handler is effectively like the smallest atomic unit of everything else in the app router. So the sitemap just builds on the app router, right? So you can still do a bunch of the same stuff. Like you can make this sitemap revalidate with ISR and update periodically. When you revalidate data, it can revalidate the sitemap, which is kind of nice. So there's some built-in, you're seeing these like file names in his app directory, like open graph-image and sitemap, and like the favicon is directly in there. And like all of this stuff is built into the app router to try to help you set up your metadata. So you drop a favicon into the folder, it will automatically create the tag in the head of your document for you. You define an open graph image PNG, it will automatically drop it in the head. You turn that into a .tsx file, you can like use React to generate whatever the open graph image you want. And we have a built-in tool that allows you to do that. And it's a similar idea with sitemaps. Like go fetch your data. During the build, this will run and output the XML document for you.
Yeah, and I will add,
go for it.
I do like that Next.js did add kind of nested sitemaps as well now, because when I remember when the app router first came out, it was just the root level, and so that kind of allows you to have like the granular level of like, okay, I just want all the news articles in this one sitemap, and then all my maybe static, like the about, contact us, homepage in another. And I think that's super helpful where Next.js just picks up on it. Wherever you place it, it kind of adds that sitemap there, which has been helpful for me. So
that's pretty cool. I didn't know that you could do sitemaps like this. That's pretty cool. And for the people who are not familiar with like Sanity and Grok and stuff, like if you go to the other sitemap thing that you had, like you see it here as well, but like here's a bunch of Grok queries. And again, this is like if you have used GraphQL, it's kind of like fairly like it feels a little bit similar, but it's more low level. Like you can do stuff like count functions to kind of like query against the amount of something and so on. And like time flies, but like a good thing to know about Grok is that a lot of Grok can be optimized by us. Like we can kind of like make it super fast against your document store. But when it comes to things that kind of demands compute on the current state, like count us, like you count all the posts, we have to kind of like pull that into a compute thing, and that is always like a little more computationally expensive. I.e., it takes a bit longer time. It should be pretty fast. Kind of, it's not like before you have like thousands and thousands and thousands of things, you start to kind of feel that more. But just a thing to be aware of. Like, hopefully, this project exists for 10 years, and there's like just endless amounts of content. And the trick for Grok optimization, you see like these brackets here, square brackets. This is a filter. This is where you can like you take all your documents and you can like filter them down by some conditions. And the more you can filter on the static things before you do something computationally kind of like expensive, or you do joins or something, the more performant the Grok query will be, because it does things to less documents, basically. So that's kind of like a heuristic to think about. So if you had kind of like put this count thing first in a query, it would be slower than when it's last, kind of, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So that's like a little Grok tip there. And we also have like a whole documentation article on high performance Grok, how to kind of like optimize it a bit. I also know that we have kind of like worked a lot with pagination. So like the pattern where you in the front end can like paginate like a post archive or something. And here's also like another Grok pattern where I think it's in your sanity queries.ts. You have co-located all the Grok expressions here, and I think you use kind of like indices or like slices on the kind of like document array. Is that correct? Do I remember correctly?
I was like, no, I forget off the top of my head. This is one of them.
Yes.
But now,
so what's happening here is that you're fetching the posts, and they're using like this array slicing on line 204. And then you also kind of like fetch the total amount of posts to know like how many things you can slice up, right? This works. It's not as performance as something called, like, you can also kind of like filter. I'm not doing a great job. So you can use, like, because the IDs of the posts are sequential, you can use kind of like the IDs to kind of like filter, like, let me get everything that's kind of like after this post ID, right?
gotcha.
And that way it's more performant, and probably also not prone to the thing where if you publish something while people are in the pagination thing weirdness. Pagination is a whole like subject, but we also have like a documentation article on how to, like, different pagination strategies with Grok queries and so on to make them more performant. But again, when it's pre-rendered, like, maybe it's marginal wins and so on. But yeah, should we dive into more of the editorial experience? We have like done a lot of front ending, but maybe you can pull up your studio. And
Sure.
and just to understand, this is an embedded studio, right?
Yes.
So
yes.
what you
it
have
used to be self-hosted or hosted by you guys, and then now it's embedded into my Next.js app.
All right. So what we're looking at here is like the content backend for this Next.js side, and this is Sanity Studio, which is, we say, like just a React dependency. So it's like a single page application, and since it comes as a React dependency, you can mount this on a Next.js route, which is pretty cool. And then we do a little bit of like magic to kind of like make it work at a spa. So it has like this catch-all thing that route Next can do. So like all the subsequent slugs are kind of like routing to this component. And for people who are not familiar with Sanity, all the content here, all the documents are hosted in kind of like something called Content Lake, so a hosted document store, which you query with Grok or GraphQL if you prefer that. So yeah, and here you have like the interface that your content team of 7 are looking at. Maybe you can like take us quickly through how this is kind of like laid up and some of your thoughts about how this works.
Yeah. So I have it, I guess, filtered by different divisions that everybody can write on. And so that's literally a single document type of just post. And then I filter it down. Here are all the divisions that I grabbed from a division document as well. So that when a writer wants to write something about, FCS, they can just click into FCS and then click new document. And a cool thing is I pre-populate the value for them, so like they don't even have to worry about that. And then, yep, schools. So this is basically every single school that is in college football. Well, not all of them. I have not had the time to put them all in, but for some of the divisions, they're there. And then if you come into like conferences, you can actually first filter down by division. Okay, I want to see this, and then you see all the conferences that are associated to that division. But yeah, that's kind of how I've structured everything.
And you also was like, how can I improve the editorial experience? And I looked through this, like, there's a lot of great patterns there already. It's like in like a stock Sanity studio, when you start to set up the schema or the content model, like what you would have in this content kind of like pane here would just be post, and then like all the posts would kind of be listed out. What you have done here is use something called Structure Builder that lets you customize how all of this is laid out. And that's like give your kind of like team a more kind of like specialized workflow. So this is like just a great example of doing that. I also like noticed that you had articles per year, right, under there. Like this is kind of you writing a little bit of JavaScript to generate kind of like this group of years. All of this is like fully dynamic. It's not, no one can have to drag like documents into these folders. It's like just generated by the structured data in the documents. They're pretty cool. I also noticed on your posts kind of like schema, if you go back to like a post, any post or the best post, I don't know. This is a great post.
I'll go to our latest one.
So what I liked, like what you have done here, which is great, is to kind of give most of these fields like a description. Like, what is the point with this field? What should you think about? And that's super helpful for content teams. Hopefully, like have your content team found it helpful, or have you seen like better results because of it?
I don't get asked as many questions. That's for sure.
Yeah,
so
that's a good KPI. Yeah.
So that's always helpful. When they're like, at first when there was nothing, they're like, okay, so I just put a title that's whatever long, and I'm like, no, make it this. And then I was like, all right, let me just add a description. And then same with this. I think this was the most helpful one of adding it for the slug, because people would not auto-generate it. They were just typing it in, and then it wouldn't match the title, and that's how I wanted it. So I was like, please just click the generate button. So
and we have like here we have like the SEO thing kind of lurking in the background, because like the title has an implication for SEO, and also the slug, like nice semantic slugs. Google is kind of like fond of that. If you make a new article, I'm not sure if this is prod or dev or if you care, but and you type in something in one field, I just want to see what happens. Let's see. Oh, and then we got like a bunch of warnings here. And this is also another great pattern. Like you have set fields as required, so you make sure that your like authors are like putting in the right stuff you need to render this page. There's also a little warning kind of like icon on the title now. And here you have like customized kind of like warning labels. Like, hey, it must be at least 32 characters to kind of like be optimized for Google or something, probably, right? And another neat thing you have done here, because like Sanity Studio doesn't come out with this character count out of the box, but your studio has this. Do you want to show us how you made that happen?
Sure. Hop back in here.
So this is like the Sanity specific kind of like configuration code and customization code.
Let me just close out some of this. But yeah, so basically, like if we come to this title, I set components, and the input is this custom string input with limits, which is just a JSX component. with a little bit of JavaScript and to output how many characters there are. But yeah, just using the built-in Sanity UI components, and then I just render it with that input.
Yeah. So what this does, like a custom input component in Sanity, it gives you the state of the input. So like that's value here. So that's like what's currently written in. And then here on line 14, you just like count that, and then you can like render that as the number. I also notice here that you have chosen to have like the text input element, and the other custom input, where we have customized like the rich text editor, you use the render default thing. Why did you choose to have like different methods? And I can also explain this a little bit.
To be honest, I don't remember. I think this was actually from I think you actually in the Slack channel, and just trying to figure out a way to do this, and I think you actually helped me.
Yeah. Also, very, very common pattern. Like you try to do it yourself, and you find a way to do it, and then you see like, oh, here's like the canonical way of doing it, and you just do that going forward, and you don't go back to fix the other thing. Like I do that all the time. But here is the better pattern. Like you use something called props render default, and then you pass props into it. Or what that would do is just render the default input, and then you can kind of like augment it with other stuff around it. So you make sure that it's kind of like the input is like just working great as intended, like as out of the box, and then you have like your other stuff around it, which is pretty cool. So this is probably more useful for everyone watching than for you. You already know this, James. But I think those were good patterns, and then we can talk about like what could we improve. And we have like past the 1 hour mark, so I will try to like make this swift and fast, and we can get out of here. But if you go back to your studio, like when you are kind of like scaling editorial experiences, and you're adding a lot of great fields like and structured content, and like my first kind of input like for the SEO stuff, what we often see customers doing is like have dedicated SEO fields that lets you kind of like override how things looks on Google, because you might want to have like the editorial stuff should be like this, but on Google it should be like this because it's a different context, right? So you make like dedicated SEO fields that kind of just overrides the default fields if that's necessary. And then we have at least like 3 more fields because like a SEO title, SEO description, maybe like an open graph image, like even though you're generating those, right? And what's good then is to start to group fields in something called field tabs, I think, or field groups, which gives you tabs on the top where you can kind of quickly filter different fields to kind of get to where you need to. So that's like a little like efficiency hack, I guess, or not a hack, but like improvement. You're already using something called initial value templates. That's how kind of like it works that when you can like make a new article within like D3 or D2, it's automatically populated with this thing, which is also pretty cool that you can do that. There are probably more things you can pre-populate maybe to kind of like save your author's time. The trade-off is that if they forget to double check that, like it might come up with the wrong data because they forgot to double check. So it's kind of like something you can very often talk to your content team to kind of figure out where does it make sense, right? Let's see what else. Oh yeah, like going back to how you customize this whole like lists and so on. If you pull up your structure builder code, or desk structure.ts, I think it's called, in your project. So here, it's a pretty low-level API. I hope we get time to kind of like make a higher abstraction of this, but it lets you kind of like very surgically customize whatever should show up in this list. And here you do some kind of different stuff. You are fetching content to kind of like populate these lists, right? And you have like some other fetches here. And what's kind of like not known to everyone is that this list or this like function can also return something called an observable. So like kind of like a real-time variable. And since our content lake is also supporting real-time events, like you can actually make this whole list real-time. Because what is happening now is that you fetch this list with content, and then if someone adds more content, that won't show up before you reload the studio and like trigger this fetch again. Like it's I'm not sure if you have time to go into like that refactor, but we have something called the client.subscribe, which returns an observable, and then you use like, I think you only need a map function from Next.js to kind of like just map out the list in the state you want it in real time. And that will also kind of improve the editorial experience a little bit. Yeah, I think we have some patterns in our docs and stuff I can share later. But yeah.
Awesome.
So yeah, I think we hit all of your like points. To kind of like close this stream up, like, is there anything that's like unanswered, James? Like that, like, oh, I wish they have addressed this.
Not particularly. I think some of the changes that I make would, because my only question was the fast origin transfer in Vercel, just because I've hit that quota quite a few times, and so I just was like, okay, how can I streamline this? But I think after some of the changes, like I'll go back and relook at it again. But yeah, other than that, I think we've hit everything.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, I have some questions in the chat as well about like we touched on the revalidation stuff. Like Matt here, who happens to be a colleague of Lee, had this great point. Like a reason to kind of like split up your queries might be you want more granular revalidation, right? Again, trade-offs all the way down. And there are also some questions about hydration issues with Next.js, Next Sanity packages and so on, and incoming references. Oh yeah, you had like an incoming references tab, James. This is like where it gets a little bit embarrassing for me, because this should be a feature. So like Sanity is very oriented to, like, around structured content and kind of like not looking at content as like pages, but as like things in themselves, and then you can like compose kind of like routes and pages out of them, and you use references for that. And references are great because they're also integral. So like if you set up a reference, you can't just delete a thing that depends on another thing, or the vice versa. And I'm getting to a point here, but like very often you want to see, okay, I have a document here. What is referencing this document? Like we have in Notion, for example, incoming references. We don't have that out of the box, but there's like a plugin thing called document list where you can set up a Grok query that kind of like does that for you, that you had in the studio. So yeah, like +1 on the feature request, I guess.
Yeah.
Makes a lot of sense. You actually have it in one place. If you try to delete a document that is referenced to from another, we will actually say like, hey, there's a reference, incoming references here. You might want to think about this. And if it's strong references, we actually won't let you delete that document before you solve those. So yeah. Anywho, that was a little over an hour. I learned a lot about Next.js and stuff.
Yeah, thank you, James. This was great.
Yeah, thank you.
And there wasn't that much to say, actually. It looks pretty good. And I guess like your repository is open, so people can also go and look at this. I don't have the link handy. That's amateurish for me, but but maybe we can put it into the YouTube description after. But yeah, thank you, both of you, for being here and sharing your experience and knowledge and code and stuff. And maybe we'll do this again sometime. Let's see.
Awesome.
Sounds great.
See you all. Thanks. Thank you.